I would probably switch now into risk and exposure. And I would like to ask you, which is in your view, which are the legal and financial consequences of a breach of temporary admission conditions, and how these conditions differ across EU jurisdictions. Christine?
So we can say it's what breaches a temporary admission. So we can start off by clarifying that. So the breaches would include, obviously, remaining in the EU for over 18 months, not affecting the re-export, having an EU owner. And so these are some of the aspects of having a commercial activity during the TA. So these would be the aspects, the breaches, which would trigger off legal and financial implications. By legal, I would obviously, the yacht will no longer remain in free circulation, and therefore it would trigger off immediately the VAT liability. And also, the Maltese also would have the right to do so in Malta, to actually seize the yacht and not enable it to continue moving, because obviously it is no longer in free circulation. With respect to financial, obviously you'd have the import VAT, which would be immediately triggered off. You'd have any customs duty, which may become applicable. If the boat is actually seized, then you might have extra port fees, you might have legal costs, etc. So there are definitely serious legal and financial implications.
Jean-Philippe?
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, whenever you have a VAT liability, all of a sudden the numbers get really big, really quick by the administration, because depending on which type of breach you've caused, well, you will have a starting point for VAT payment and evaluation of the VAT payment and evaluation of the late payment penalties that will be different. For example, if you overstay your period of stay in the EU, then it will be from the date you overstayed. But if you were never eligible for TA in the first place, it will be from the date where you were placed under TA. So you lose 18 months. It means your boat is valued 10, 15% more, and you have 18 months of late payment interest. In France, they will charge the VAT at 20%, late payment interest, which are 2.4% per year. You will also be charged the customs duties. So if you have a smaller boat, some of them are subject to customs duties. If you're in the overseas territories, you will be charged with the specific customs duties of overseas territories, what we call octroi de mer régional. Don't know what the translation is in English. It's very old French words, basically customs duties. And any additional customs duties as well. So if you have additional customs duties, for example, placed on US boats in the future or currently, then they will also be charged at that same time. So you have a very high bill all of a sudden. You will also be charged with a penalty that in France reaches up to 1 to twice the value of the boat, not the VAT of the boat. So it's a very high penalty, because the penalty for breach of customs regulation is usually confiscation of the goods. So you have the value of the goods confiscated, and then you have a penalty of 1 times the value of the confiscated goods. And if usually customs don't like to confiscate, what they do is they seize the boat and they ask for what is called the equivalent of the confiscation. So it's the value of the boat that you need to pay to release the boat. So it can get very quickly very expensive. Luckily, you have elements which you can use to mitigate the valuation of the boats, so the customs value of the boat that you will be using, and you have a possibility to discuss the level of fines, so the additional payments you'll be required to make. Usually, if you're of good faith, French customs will charge anything between 10 to 25%. If you're of bad faith, then the cursor goes up and up and up until they charge what they want to charge. If you're of really bad faith, you're not seeing your boat again.
Carla?
Yes, in Italy, it's almost like in France. I think that the most interesting issue from a juridical point of view is the identification of VAT on importation in the case of breach of temporary admission regime as a customs duty, because VAT is paid at the time of the importation and is required if there is a breach in the temporary admission. But the point, if we are talking about an internal VAT to be paid because the relevant conditions for payment occur, is one point, and this has nothing to share with the smuggling. If this has to be considered surely as violation in terms of customs duties, this is smuggling, and the consequences that Jean-Philippe mentioned are normal consequences, because we are talking about the consequences of smuggling, that is seizure, confiscation, and the penalty, which also in Italy goes to from once to twice the VAT, which must be collected. Interest are around the same. They are now in legal interest in terms of under 2%, but it depends if you pay on a voluntary basis or there is an assessment for the VAT, so also interest can change. But these are details. The main point is, are we talking about a breach because a beneficial owner and the user of the yacht or the owner just interpreted differently the same legal framework and based on the interpretation of another jurisdictions thought to be lawful and was happy to use his boat under lawful rules, or there is really a breach, maybe just a yacht which stayed in Europe maybe for more than 2 years, which is the time limit also in the case of extensions in terms of time of the temporary admission regime period of discharge. So I think that there should be differences in the also tax burden, penalties, and cost and consequences in terms of a seizure or smuggling and confiscation for these different cases. And currently, I can't find this difference in the practice used by around the various customs authorities. I don't know if you agree on this, but I think that a strong suggestion should be, let's divide the level of breaches, because there are really big differences.
Yeah, I really definitely
You have
subscribe.
some of them, I agree with you, Carla. You have some of them that are very good faith breaches, and some of them where you know that the people knew that what they were doing was not correct and played the system for as long as they could. But we see a lot of clients in good faith. For example, you still see a lot of people that think that Monaco is part of the EU and don't realize that they're actually in breach of temporary admission. And it's a very basic thing. And they would have paid the VAT, but they thought they enjoyed this tax relief of,
yes,
temporary admission. And you're still faced with a heavy bill and payment penalties.
Yes, protection of good faith and legitimate expectation in this case is mandated, should be, and it is now.
The only thing is that in France we have specific provision that says that good faith is not a defense in customs matters. It's an objective breach. So good faith, bad faith is the same.
Thank you all for covering this point. From a Spanish perspective, I totally subscribe your comments in terms of differentiation or the approach for smuggling offense, date when a potential infringement or tax event occurs, and how that affects on the potential related tax liability, the penalties applicable, the possibility of special valuation of vessels if they get involved in these kinds of investigations. If I should say a particularity of Spain, as I briefly outlined line that I mentioned before is the special mean of transport tax, matriculation tax in Spain, which in principle, any yacht that benefits from temporary admission is exempt of VAT and is exempt of the 12% matriculation tax. So it could happen that in some situations where there is a breach of the customs regulations based on the fact that the owner becomes a Spanish resident, on top of 21% Spanish VAT, the 12% matriculation tax could be applicable as well. So without considering potential penalties. So that's one of the particularities of Spain compared with other EU member states.